Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. It's been a while. Well, for me it has. I haven't recorded one of these in like over a month at this point, but for you guys it's only been like 2 weeks, so it can't be that bad. And to get it out of the way for all of you Yakuza fans who don't watch my videos in full, I liked this one, so if you actually care why, then stick around. If you don't, then get out of here. Call me abrasive if you will, but considering some of the comments that I got while I was away for a month, I really doubt the reading comprehension or listening comprehension, just comprehension in general when it comes to some of the Yakuza fans who troll around YouTube looking for videos that disagree with them, only to disagree themselves without having to watch the video. I don't know. Who knows why they do the things they do? The point is, I was not seeing a lot of intelligence in those Yakuza comments, so again, if you just care about whether I liked the game or not, I liked it. Now leave. But in terms of the actual content of the video, now for the rest of it. So obviously Yakuza 7 is very funny in that it was just like, yo, we're an RPG now, and like looking back at it in retrospect, because I didn't even really have Yakuza on my radar until Like a Dragon came out. I can't imagine being a Yakuza fan and having the games just be RPGs now, especially a turn-based RPG, because technically Yakuza has always been a RPG, or at least had RPG mechanics, though by that metric a lot of games are RPGs, and that's just not a conversation I want to get into right now. But the point is, a turn-based RPG specifically, and that's just what the series is for the foreseeable future, is wild to me, and as someone who likes RPGs, I would be very, very sad if one day my favorite, or one of my favorite series, I don't know, however you view Yakuza, was just suddenly like, alright, now the gameplay's completely different now. I love turn-based RPGs, but if they ever came out with another Batman Arkham game and said, hey guys, it's a turn-based RPG now, I would be incredibly sad. But again, I do like turn-based RPGs, so in terms of things to praise about the game, Yakuza 7 does one thing that I really, really like in RPGs when they do this, but strangely not a lot of RPGs do, which is when you level up, you get all your resources back, all your MP and HP. And to an extent, I understand why a lot of games don't do this, because turn-based RPGs are, for the most part, a resources game. When you're going through a dungeon, you're not necessarily worried about how every individual enemy might be dangerous to you, you're more worried about being able to get through the entire dungeon with enough MP and HP to be able to fight whatever tougher enemies lie at the end. People don't like Dragon Quest because it's like too simple, which I understand, but Dragon Quest is like the most distilled version of this gameplay loop, where everything that you do is leading up to a tougher encounter, and so you're constantly trying to micro-organize every single bit of MP you spend on whatever you spend it on. But there are also a lot of RPGs that make levels feel inconsequential. Again, there are a lot of RPGs that do this well, Dragon Quest is one of them, you'll get abilities constantly if you're constantly leveling up. But in games like a lot of the early Final Fantasies, levels will only ever give you stats, if even that, because in Final Fantasy VI, leveling up only gives you HP, the stats you get from the magic that you have equipped, and the ultimate point is that leveling up should feel impactful both in the moment and on a macro scale, and not just on a macro scale. And this is why I like getting resources back when you level up, because again, the entire gameplay loop is trying to organize how you spend your MP throughout a dungeon, and if one of your characters is close to a level up, you know that you can overextend yourself in certain fights because they're gonna be close to a level up. One of my favorite things to do with Ichiban, whenever he was close to a level up, was just spam Essence of Orbital Laser, because it takes like over half of his MP, well, depending on how much you have at any given point, but it takes 200 MP to use, and that's quite a lot, even in the late game. But when he's close to level up, you can just throw that out in a fight, and you know you're gonna get the resources back, so you don't have to worry about, having the fight go on for too long. So because having intimate knowledge of a level up will affect the choices that you make in every individual battle, that itself makes it part of the gameplay loop, and why I think it makes it fun. When your level ups only matter on a macro scale because of stats and all that, you're not going to be worried about whatever level ups you get in the middle of a battle or after a battle, because it's just another stat increase. You'll get it eventually, no reason to pay attention to it. And then another thing that Yakuza 7 does that more turn-based RPGs should do is perfect guarding. I love the Mario & Luigi series because you can play those games and never get hit once. It'll probably happen because, like, statistically, there's not a big chance you're gonna dodge every move perfectly, both on your first try and on subsequent tries, but you can do it. It's possible. You can get through those games with no damage on you because the game allows you to defend against everything that comes at you perfectly. As much as I love Dragon Quest XI, it is a pretty annoying part of that game that you just have to get hit a lot of the time. At the point I'm recording this, another trailer for Clair Obscura Expedition 33 has come out. I think that's what it's called. I might be fucking out a little bit. But that game also has defense mechanics when it's your turn, and that's what I want from more turn-based RPGs. Honestly, I just want more good turn-based RPGs in general, but this is absolutely a good step in the right direction, and I'm used to those by now. The only complaint I have about perfect guarding is that it's not really a perfect guard. Like I said about the Mario and Luigi games, you can play those entire games without taking damage once, but the problem that I have with perfect guarding in Yakuza 7 is that you have to take damage. Even if you perfect guard, all that does is lower the damage you actually take, it doesn't negate it. And in some of the more dire cases, like when you're close to death, there's no reason to perfect guard at all because perfect guarding doesn't save you from death, you will just take damage. And so while it's not exactly a criticism of the game for not doing it, I do wish the game did do it, because otherwise, perfect guarding is more or less just delaying the inevitable rather than actually rewarding the player for doing anything. Especially since out of the turn-based RPGs that I've played, Yakuza 7 has some of the most abundant healing ever, whether it be between your healers doing it outside of battle and then just giving them MP restore, or actually just going someplace to eat and then restoring your MP as well, on top of maybe even giving you an EXP boost or whatever other boost you get from those food places, but that don't last very long because they only last for 3 battles, which isn't really jack shit in the overworld, and especially not anything in boss fights. But we're not in the negatives yet, so we'll get there. And so to stick with the positives, Yakuza 7 also has one of the best basic attacks I've ever seen in any RPG. Again, to go back to the Mario and Luigi well, which... forgive me for constantly referencing them, but they are some of the best RPGs, at least conceptually, ever put on the planet, so I find them to be an incredibly useful referencing tool. But back to the point, in Mario & Luigi, your basic attacks will stay effective throughout the entire game. Just jumping or just using the hammer will always do some pretty okay damage. You're going to be using bros moves for most of the game, which is to be expected, but for the most part, you're going to be at the end of the game and still using jump and hammer on enemies because it still does some pretty okay damage. They're not completely useless. And Yakuza 7 is much the same way. Using a basic attack on an enemy will still do good damage by the end of the game, assuming you have your equipment up, but that's a bit of a different thing. Especially if you're still making use of knockdowns, which you very well should be, because by the end of the game you're going to be using more special moves, and special moves will almost always result in knockdowns. The only complaint that I really have about basic attacks is that early game, very often your basic attacks will result in knockdowns, which means that you go for more knockdowns from your other party members, but late game, more enemies just sort of tank that shit, and so you will have to use special moves to get knockdowns, but even then, it still does mean that your basic attacks have utility, just slightly less utility than they did early in the game. And while I've certainly made it known by now that I'm not a fan of real-time RPG stuff like from Final Fantasy, I do appreciate that they give you enough time to decide whether or not you want to use a basic attack on a knockdown enemy, while still pressuring you to make a decision quickly. Especially since, if you decide to not use a basic attack, you don't even have to be rushed, you can just do whatever you want after that point. And since the game does show you who goes next in the battle order, you always have the ability to be ready for a knockdown. And finally, while I don't really have much to say about it because I'm just not gonna talk about the story much here, Yakuza 7 has the second best story of every Yakuza game, which is not high praise because I think most of them kinda suck, but it is a story second only to 0, which had a fantastic story, so that is high praise for Yakuza 7, within its own little bubble of good Yakuza stories, up there with 0 and 4. And that's it. Ichiban is fantastic. I love him. He's awesome. He's very different from Kiryu, obviously, but in a way that makes him endearing. It's not like, oh, this guy just isn't as cool as Kiryu and this series needs a cool protagonist. No, Ichiban is cool, just not like stoic, shit brick house cool. He's just more like a cool guy. Like, people love him, and he is earnest, and he does awesome things. That's what makes him cool. He very much has the energy of a very standard issue shonen protagonist, but there's a reason people like shonen protagonists and why it's a very popular trope to use in those stories, because people like them, and they lend themselves very easily to protagonist writing, where if you want to have a morally good protagonist, it's very easy to make them an earnest person, because then you get to see them full frontal. You, as the audience, know exactly what they believe in, because they damn near scream at the top of their lungs. You understand them very well as a character, which is what endears the audience to them. And if you want to add more layers on top of that aren't so easily viewable on the surface, you can still do that. It's just more hidden because, again, they're more explicit, which is what Ichiban is. He has more layers under his shonen protagonist, especially viewable in his side stories. The one with the girl in white, to not spoil it, is one of my favorite in the game, just from a story standpoint, because you do get to do stuff in it, which is something we'll come back to later, but the story itself is very, very cool because it shows a part of Ichiban that you don't see very much throughout the normal game. And speaking of throughout the normal game, all the other characters are also awesome. Not equally awesome, mind you. I'm a way bigger fan of Adachi and Nanba and Zhao than I am of like Jungi Han or Sayako, or Eri, who isn't a party member. But I do still generally like them. And even Sayako, who I am not like a huge fan of, still has good dialogue during like the overworld talks that they have. So even if she herself is not a character I'm interested in, her dynamic with the other characters makes me interested in their talks, which I think is the best you can ask for when it comes to a character that you're not a huge fan of. Even the villains, who I think are a tad weak, still get done a lot of justice throughout the story, especially Masato, who for most of the game I just wasn't really a fan of, both in the prequel section and throughout the parts of the game where you find out he's alive again. I just didn't really like him all that much, but Ichiban's speech about Hikari Toyami at the end of the game was very, very good, and it made me almost like Masato. Keyword being almost, but it's enough for me to still say the story is good, and that, you know, me not liking Masato is probably just a personal thing. I think that genuinely the only criticism that I could levy against Yakuza 7's story, which even then might still be a personal thing, is Ichiban's back tattoo. I understand that, again, in the Yakuza world, Ichiban explains it. It's like, oh yeah, being the dragon's like the top of the food chain. So if you give yourself a dragon, you're saying like, I'm gonna be a big motherfucker. But Ichiban's like, I don't want to be that. I want to be able to serve Arakawa for the rest of my life. And so he doesn't want to be a dragon, but he wants to be close enough. So dragonfish. I understand that. But if you're gonna try and sell Ichiban to me as the new protagonist, you gotta make him a little bit more ambitious than that. Especially since the dragonfish feels like trying to have your cake and eat it too. Like, guys, it's like a dragon. It's not really a dragon, but it's like it, and it looks enough like it that you won't be able to tell from if you look at it far away and squint. So he's got a dragon tattoo. He's the next protagonist. And given how much passion and drive Ichiban has, I don't think it's fitting to be like, oh yeah, he gets a dragonfish. It's not really a dragon because he's not like that. When I think that he is. And now, granted, I understand that RGG probably has a way deeper understanding of the intricacies of Yakuza idealism than I do, so it might be deeper than just than what Ichiban explains in the game. But as far as I, the player, can understand it from what has been explained to me, I think that giving him a dragonfish is a little bit of a cop-out. But if we're talking criticisms of the story, I guess it's time to talk about criticisms of the game, too. Yakuza fans, if you're still around, first of all, thank you. I'm glad you wanted to stick around to hear me out. But this is the part where I slag the game. You know how in my Yakuza video, I was slagging basically every Yakuza game? Except not really, I praised 4 a lot. But this is that part. So to get straight into it, I think I should bring up one of the things that I think a lot of people bring up about this game in terms of the few criticisms I see people usually have, which is that the whole randomly moving around the arena thing is super annoying. And normally I wouldn't have a huge problem with it, because in something like Dragon Quest XI, you can move around the arena. Oh, in 11S, I don't know about the base game, but in 11S you can move around the arena, and it doesn't actually change anything that happens. It's just a neat way to give you a more dynamic camera, and if Yakuza 7 was also like that, then it wouldn't really matter. But the problem is that the game has like AoE attacks and environment attacks, so when people are moving around randomly and it causes your things to miss or just not activate at all, it gets way more annoying. It's especially painful when it comes to basic attacks that are multi-hits, because unless you're like the Matriarch or Ichiban, you know, characters that have long-range swinging moves, it feels like a lot of them can just miss due to the physics system. I can't count how many times Nanba, when he was still in his homeless guy job, just completely fucking whiffed the umbrella. Because he swings it like such a motherfucker, he always misses third hit early on. Okay, always is hyperbole, but it was way more often than not. But because the game has actual misses in it, like, you know, the stat for accuracy, and you just miss the attack, I couldn't tell which times were just actually missing because of physics, or like the attacks have to physically connect, or if I was just getting bad rolls. Either way, I still think it's a decent criticism, especially since, even beyond basic attacks, it way more applies to AoE attacks. There are a lot of AoE attacks that are only useful as AoE attacks, like Ichiban's Giga Swing, or the Dancer's Spin Sweeper, stuff like that. Or fucking Adachi's dash move that does a lot of damage in the early game, but half the time you're not gonna fucking hit anybody with it, or anybody aside from the one person you target, because you need to have people in a straight line for that, and that's just not gonna happen very often. They do oftentimes make the range of the abilities bigger than they appear, but bigger does not solve the immediate issue of even when they're outside the range, then it's a problem, and they could just be outside the range because they decided to walk out there. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't that bad of a problem, because as I noticed throughout playing the game, a lot of the AoE attacks are useful as AoEs, but they're really just for single target damage. Like, Ichiban's Giga Swing is the only bat swinging special move that he gets that does heavy damage, And so when you're actually using it, you're more so using it to attack the one guy with heavy damage, and it being AoE is a nice bonus if it happens to hit somebody else. And so when you start to view the AoE moves more so as moves that are normal, but they also happen to hit other people if you can get that to happen, then they become a little less annoying. So you really shouldn't be trying to go for AoE, it's just if AoE does happen, congrats. The far more potent criticisms when it comes to the random movement come to do with the enemies and the protagonists. The enemies in the sense that it's really annoying that when you're going for basic attacks, enemies can just interrupt you on your way. If the person you want to attack has an enemy between you and them, I guess you're just not going to attack them, or you're going to have to wait the next, 2 minutes, and hope the other asshole moves out the way. Which does happen sometimes, so maybe it is in your best interest to just fucking wait and waste your time. Otherwise, if you try to attack, you'll just get interrupted and waste your turn. I gotta hand it to RGG, they did manage to adapt Yakuza into a turn-based RPG very well, because this shit feels exactly like when I'm playing a normal Yakuza game, and I get interrupted during group fights and I get slapped in the back. So that shit got super old super fast when playing the game. And in terms of the protagonists, in terms of Ichiban specifically, it gets really annoying how his environmental attacks seem to be random. There were times where he was very close to an environmental object and then just didn't pick it up to do an attack, which confused me. And there were times where he was fucking miles away from one of them and he still picked it up anyway. And since it feels like there's really no way to plan for these things, since they move about randomly, and then even if they move close to one, you don't know exactly how close they have to be for Ichiban to actually pick it up, then it's just not something that factors into the gameplay at all, and if anything, can actually ruin your plans if you have Ichiban with an elemental weapon, specifically his bat. Because if I want electrical damage, I want him to swing the bat. I do not want him to pick up a chair and start punching a guy with it. And then in terms of the rest of the party, something else that got super old super fast was watching party members run up to enemies, because again, attacks need to physically connect to be able to count in this game, and so whenever you go in for a basic attack, or even most special moves, and the character that you're playing as is too far away from the character you're targeting, you have to watch them actually just go and run up to them before they start their attack. And in a lot of cases, it's not really that bad. It'll be like, 3, maybe 4 seconds of them walking up to them. But in some other cases where environments are a little bit more crowded, either with enemies or objects, you could be waiting upwards of 30 seconds waiting for someone to run up to someone else. And while that doesn't sound like a lot of time, think about how many times you have to actually fight in this game. That shit adds up fast. And much like I mentioned on the Yakuza 6 Backlog Bunker, I do not like it when I can feel my time being wasted. And so even if in the moment 30 seconds isn't very long, if I'm watching 30 seconds of literally nothing happening because I'm waiting for the game to fucking work, that shit gets irritating. But hey, it wouldn't be a turn-based RPG if I wasn't up for some time-wasting bullshit, now would it? Which, speaking of, I want to get more general about RPGs for a second. One of the most important things about any RPG is the menus, because a whole lot of any RPG, turn-based or not, is the menus. Obviously turn-based games have more of them, but that's besides the point. Ultimately, the design of your menu is very important to your RPG, and if you don't design a good menu, then you're not gonna give the player a very smooth experience for the whole game. One of my few complaints with Dragon Quest XI is that game has way too many sub-menus, and then even among the sub-menus, some of them are in places that I don't think they should be. I believe that pressing start brings up Nose for Treasure, Picture Mode, and the quest catalog. And if you're gonna say that there are 3 things that are so important they need an entire button dedicated to their menu, why the fuck would you choose those 3? Then there's things like pet powers taking too long to get to when you're looking through the character's attributes. It's all just a fucking mess. I really do not like Dragon Quest XI's menus. A far less terrible example is Persona 5, where there are things I just don't think need to be taking up space on the menu, like the calendar. What the fuck is the calendar for? It doesn't tell you when any of your confidants are available, which is like the one thing you would need for a Persona calendar. It only tells you shit like when your job is available, which is fucking stupid because working a job is pointless in Persona 5. Or when the palace due date is, but the game tells you that in the top right of the screen every single day, at all times, so you don't need a fucking calendar for that. But I say all this to say, Yakuza 7, for the most part, has good menus, but it makes decisions that I don't like. Like, why is Dragon Kart an entire option in the menu? I understand that it's one of the game's more involved minigames, but like, why not Ichiban Confection? Something you'd actually want to keep track of, kind of, to an extent. Or just not including a minigame there at all, since you have to go to the minigame itself to actually be able to play it in the first place, so including it on the fucking menu has no point. Why not put the job skills you get from leveling up out here on this menu, instead of like 3 menus deep into the party option for some goddamn reason? Admittedly, I didn't do much of Dragon Kart outside of like a handful of races after I first unlocked it, so if there was some reason to check the menu version of it that I just never looked at, then I guess I'll eat crow on that one. But otherwise, I just don't think it was a very useful option to include in the menu, and it really, again, it's not a huge thing. but it's something I want to talk about because I do think it applies to RPGs in general, and it's probably a topic I'll return to again at some point with some other RPG. I really did just want to talk about menus in RPGs for a second. And then to return to a criticism that I made of other Yakuza games, sub-stories are a bit of a mixed bag. If you'll remember, the big criticism that I had of sub-stories in Yakuza 0 were that they didn't really give you anything. And that criticism almost kinda sorta applies here as well. Because ironically, despite being the first Yakuza game to be a straight-up turn-based RPG, this is the first one aside from 0 that doesn't give you any EXP for completing them. You may get EXP for doing a fight in them, but that quickly becomes insignificant as the game goes on, which is something else that we'll talk about later. Really, the only things to be gained from sub-stories are pound mates, Ichiban confections, and specific items. But I think the Ichiban confections characters are pretty awful. The pound mates are marginally useful, but I didn't really use them much throughout the game, so I don't know how well they would have helped. And items are really only useful if you know which ones you need. But unless you do every sub-story, which I did because I was interested in them, but the game itself gives no incentive for, then there's no way to know which sub-stories will give you which things you actually want. So your options are to either do all of them, or to just guess and play a bunch of sub-stories that you're not interested in. But since we briefly mentioned Ichiban Confections, I might as well go over it here. I think it's better than Kiryu's business minigame in 0, but not a very good minigame in general. It is a very, very, very basic management game where you just, set characters to get your numbers up, and then you watch the numbers go up. And watching the numbers go up sure does take a minute, and they knew it took a minute because they included a button to speed it up. Why didn't they just make that the default speed? Who fucking knows? So it's really just a watching numbers go up game, and the shareholder minigame is only actual game part of it, and even that becomes incredibly easy as soon as you figure out how it actually works. Like I said, the slow part is the only part that I really find annoying, because as I've said, for many, many games at this point, if you're going to include a speed up button, that means you knew it was too slow, and if you knew it was too slow, then why didn't you speed it up? But in the grand scheme of things, not a huge deal. It's an easy way to get money, but otherwise it's not a huge part of the game. You can beat it in a couple of hours. But now for the things that really drag the game down, starting with the smallest of them, which is main character dying. I understand that it's a pretty tired talking point when it comes to turn-based RPGs nowadays, but it still applies. I've never seen it once serve a gameplay purpose in any game I've ever seen it in. It's never been an integral part of the gameplay where your main character has some thing where you're playing the game and you're always thinking about keeping them alive. The closest that I can think of is Persona, because since the main character can use many personas, you're basically always thinking about keeping Joker or you or whoever alive, because they're the ones that are going to carry you through most fights. However, in reality, that's not really true, because at least in Persona 5, the other party members you have are very, very strong, especially Ryuji, Anna, Morgana. Joker was usually only ever there to cover weaknesses that everybody else didn't have, but everyone else could do very good damage on their own, so Joker wasn't exactly carrying. So like I said, from a gameplay perspective, it's always been very, very weak as far as I can tell, but from a narrative perspective, I just don't think it's worth it. Because again, to bring up Persona, the reason is because you're the trickster. If you die, that means humanity loses, thematically or whatever stupid bullshit, right? But have you ever considered the small idea that maybe I don't give a shit? I want to play a fun game before I want to have a good narrative. That doesn't mean you can't have a good narrative and a fun game. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to have a good narrative and have a fun game. But that fun game always comes first. And if fun game is sacrificed in terms of, but the narrative though, it's not worth it. I don't think it's ever been worth it. I've never seen it ever been worth it, and conceptually, I don't think it ever will be worth it. The closest I've ever seen it is an Undertale, and even then, I think the genocide route is boring. The only thing stopping me from doing a genocide route in Undertale isn't because I like the characters, which I do, but it's not because of the characters that I like, it's because it's boring. I don't want to grind. That shit is boring and lame and stupid. The only reason I even want to do is for the Undyne and Sans fights, which I can do on Google. Point being, the narrative focus is also pretty weak. Then for one of the bigger criticisms, which is the boss fights, which I think that most of them kinda suck in this game. And a huge part of that is just because I think they have way, way, way too much health. I don't have any footage of it because I played the entirety of Yakuza 7 while I was away on my Steam Deck, and I don't really want to show you guys 800p footage of this game, so you just gotta take my word for it. But I was at the end of the game, and I was fighting Tendo, I think, and he was doing 40 damage to me, and I was up in the 500s. So my entire party was just pissing all over him, but his health was so high that we were doing upwards of 1,000 damage, and that was barely a dent in his health bar. And that's just an example where it was an easy fight but a long fight. Then there are examples where the fights are hard and long fights, like the infamous difficulty spike of Taiga Saejima and Goro Majima, who show up and are like, yeah, we're in this game by the way, and then they fucking piss all over you. grinding is a grander topic for RPGs that I might save for a different backlog bunker, so for now I'll just leave it at I think grinding is stupid, and I did an amount of it in this game, but that's because I wanted to, not because I think it's good. And I went to the Taiga and Majima fight way higher level than people seem to whenever I look this up online, and we were still getting fucking rolled by them. Now granted, I didn't lose the fight, I did manage to pull it through at the end, but everyone had like no MP. Saiko's stomach is probably on fire from how many staminons she had to drink down just to recover her own MP and heal the party. Everyone was doing like piss baby damage to them because, again, damage sponges. And then Kiryu was all of that shit, but he was only one guy. Sure, shit didn't feel like it though when he would go like twice in one turn. If these fights were like half as long, I would not have this big a problem with them, because they are hard fights, but they're fine hard. I don't like the elemental damage in this game, because very often it feels like a lot of the boss characters will resist fucking everything except for whatever they're weak to, which is a Persona thing, and it's bad when Persona does it, so it's bad here too. But for the most part, they are just hard fights. They're hard fights that last way too long. So I think that was a problem the game very consistently dealt with, though the only, like, two huge spikes in difficulty were Kiryu and Majima and Taiga. But then we get to the big one. The thing that makes this game really, really flop for me, on top of everything else that we've talked about, but this is like the pin of why I don't like this game all that much. I think it's a fine game, but it really just kind of flopped for me emotionally, because this is like my biggest criticism about the game, and that's the job system, which might be one of the worst I've ever had the displeasure of interacting with. The main reason it sucks so much really being that there's no reason to switch jobs ever, which kind of defeats the whole point of a job system, doesn't it? You are heavily incentivized to stay with one job because whenever you level up in a job, you get way more stat increases than you do from a character level up. So if your job is a high level, your stats are going to be high level, and whenever you switch jobs, your stats go to whatever the stats for that job is, so any sort of progress you made with one job is not going to carry over to another, meaning that it's in your best interest to just level up one job and then get all the stats from that one job. And while there are some things you can keep from going from job to job, the amount of things that you actually get to keep that are useful are very, very, very small. Those stat skills, whatever you want to call them, that you get from job leveling up, those stick around, but those are not only, well, okay, random might be the wrong word, but they're not consistent enough to be like, oh yeah, this is what I want to gain from this job. Fucking agility up 20. And the skills are so inconsistent that most of the jobs aren't going to have shit that's worth anything. Like, aside from getting elemental damage from the, like, Megaton Throw and the host, like, Ice Bucket Challenge or whatever, what is the purpose of second classing any other job for the males? Because aside from elemental damage, basically everything you'll ever need is covered by characters already. And then for the females, it's even worse, because while there might be some things that you want to second class for the females, having Saiko as anything but an idol is crippling yourself, because the hostess is the only, or sorry, not the hostess, the idol. The idol is the only real healer in the game, and the skills that you can get from second classing a healer and then just being a different job are not good. You only get the single target heal from the idle job, and the only reason you even want the idle job is for the multi-target heal. So if you don't get to keep that, you have to have one of your females be an idol, and you only get 2 of them, and that's assuming you even did Ichiban Confections, in which case you only get 1 of them. I bought the game on PC, and I just did Ichiban Confections in a day, so I did have Eri, and I made her a matriarch, which meant that she did some pretty good damage, and I didn't really have to think about what to class her as, because the female jobs kind of suck. Like, not only would you want to equip Idol to Saiko, because, like I said, you have to have someone beat an Idol, but also because all the other classes are really bad. They're either mid-damage dealers or mid-support classes, and you don't want those for either one of those, instead of just taking the really, really good class. But any of this wouldn't even really be a problem if it was just faster to level up jobs, because even the minor stat differences that you get from doing other jobs would be worth it if you could just level up a lot of jobs and get a lot of stats. But the problem is that if you want to level up a lot of jobs, you're going to be spending dozens of hours in this stupid-ass game. Because for some ungodly reason, they made the job level ups happen way, way, way more infrequently than normal character level ups. Like, by the time I was level 70 with my characters, I think my jobs were in the level 50s, and that was after grinding on Invested Vagabonds. And while I am sure that there are some people who will just be like, yeah, grind the Invested Vagabonds to get all your jobs up, that's fucking stupid, because that would take ages, or at least way longer than it should. Because, as I kind of mentioned before, I think grinding is stupid. Again, a longer conversation for some point down the line, I suppose. But when it comes to any kind of grinding in RPGs, I say that putting grinding in the game is admitting that you didn't design the game well, or that you didn't care about designing the game well, because if you wanted to have intricate and well thought out fights, you wouldn't just go pump the numbers up. And to go back to the thing I mentioned before about how the RGG just does not have any respect for my time, the way they implement grinding is the inherent flaw with putting grinding in any game, which is if you're doing it to the skilled players, they're just going to be wasting their time. Because if they're good at the game, they just have to have their levels be able to even reflect that. Because again, you can't get away with no damage in this game. You will have to take damage, and so even if you're really good at the game, you're still just going to have to get them numbers up if they're too low. So you're just going to make the skilled players waste their time. And then the unskilled players, who usually try to overlevel for things so that they can even be able to have a chance, while I don't respect them as players of RPGs in any form or fashion, that is why levels exist in RPGs. It's to just have there be a straightforward progression system, and one that can be abused if a bad player wants to just use the numbers to overcome everything. But an unskilled player trying to grind in this game will just have to grind even more to be able to keep up or keep ahead of the game, if they're even able to keep ahead of the game at all. I say all this to say, Yakuza 7's job system is so bad that it just bears not engaging with for the most part. It's really not a good sign to me that the only person I've talked to about this, and then whenever I look up online how people feel about the job system, a lot of the consensus is don't waste your fucking time with it, or you'll have to waste your time with it because the game's unbeatable without it, or just go fuck yourself. If you watch the rest of these episodes, you'll know that I'm not a fan of the early Final Fantasy games, but holy shit, 5's job system is so good. And having played that before I played this just makes me want to play 5's job system again. I probably won't, because that's an ATB game, but if 5's job system were in a different game, I would want to play that game, and Yakuza 7 certainly isn't that game. And as far as I know, Xenoblade 3's job system is the best there ever is. So when the standards are set so well by RPGs both new and old, it's really embarrassing to me that Yakuza 7 will come out like this with a job system, and then it's like they're just discovering the concept. Hopefully this gets better for Infinite Wealth. I didn't hear people complaining about that game in any capacity really, which means that either one of two things happen. Either A, the game filtered out everyone who doesn't like bad RPGs, and now the only people left are the people who are whipped and will accept the bad job system anyway, or B, they improve the job system. And I hope that it's B. I always hope that it's B. Anytime that I'm playing through a series that I don't like, I always hope the answer is B, that it improved. But given how Yakuza fans acted when I called the games even kind of disappointing, I don't have high hopes.